Adult responses. What is the priority we've got a young person who's in crisis? Well, for me, top would be just ensuring immediate safety. You need to make sure they're not going to leave the room and to kind of act on those risky urges and impulses. But ultimately, the thing that's really powerful is just making a connection. Now, I know what it's like. I've been a swan long enough, calm on the outside, and my legs are flapping underneath. And in my head, I've been doing this years and years and years, and still, if I get a young person who becomes dysregulated in a session with me, who becomes acutely distressed and dysregulated, my heart is still hammering, and in my head, I'm still doing a checklist. Have I done this? Have I asked this? Have I checked that? But I'm not going to lead with that. I'm not going to get my pen and paper out and be like, right, just need to document all of this down. What I need to do is connect, and connect on a human level. In that moment, in that instance, they don't care that I'm a psychologist. They just need me to listen. They just need me to be present. They just need me to hear and to care and to have compassion and to have empathy. And we don't really need a lot of training to do those things because they're quite innate. They're part of us as human. And the fact that you're all here today, you've self-selected, you've come here, means you do care. You're invested. You want to be there. You want to make a difference. You want to be supportive. You want to be helpful. So you've already got that. Don't you worry about it. Don't worry about, oh my gosh, am I going to be helpful? Am I not? Just sitting with somebody, sitting, holding, containing them in their moment of crisis is really powerful stuff. And then we can look at de-escalating the situation. We can identify maybe their wants, their needs, and then we can make an action plan. But don't rush the connection bit. Being a human and just sitting with somebody, listening, is really powerful stuff. It's probably the most powerful thing that you can possibly do. And I want to start, really, when we're thinking about adult responses, I'm going to do a few strategies, but I really want to talk about approaches and principles. And I want to start by telling you the starfish story. Now, those of you that were involved with our suicide awareness prevention campaign several years ago will know that we did a lot of work based around the starfish story. And it goes a little something like this. Forgive me for not doing it verbatim, but a little boy was on the beach, and many hundreds of thousands of starfish had washed upon the shore. And he was picking them up and he was throwing them back into the sea. And a man came along and he laughed at the little boy and he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, the sea's gone out and the sun's coming up and these starfish are going to die unless I throw them back out to sea." And again the man laughed and he said, "But look, there are thousands. You can't possibly make a difference." And the little boy picked up a starfish and he threw it back into the sea and he said, "Well, I made a difference for that one." And so we love that story, and we used that as quite a pivotal piece in our last campaign. And we went into schools up and down Hampshire, making ceramic starfish, telling the starfish story, and thinking about the difference that individually we can make and collectively. Because if you always default and say, "Oh, it's somebody else's problem," or "it's not my problem," or "what difference can I make?" then we're going to get nowhere. And here is one of our installations. And so I guess the point being within this is that we want kind of to love children and love our young people unconditionally. Relentless kindness. Life is cruel, life is really tough, and they've got a lot of things to face. And so we need that kindness, we need that compassion. That doesn't mean that you kind of don't have expectations and boundaries and that you follow through with those, but you can do that with exacting compassion too. And consistency. Being consistent in your care, in your love, is important. And going back to basics. I'm not trying to do anything too fancy. There's loads of fancy stuff out there, but actually, the key parts of listening, holding somebody, being with somebody, that's the most important stuff. And holding hope. You know? I've worked with some young people, I've worked with adults too, who've had mental health difficulties for years and years and years. And they've lost all hope for themselves. And they certainly don't need us to lose hope either. There's always hope. There's always hope that things could be different. Things could change. And so if a young person can't see that for themselves, then we need to hold that hope for them. And yes, it's frustrating. It's really bloody annoying when you've worked really hard with somebody and you feel like it's gone one ear and out the other. I get that. And it's okay to hold those emotions within yourself. You're human too. But that doesn't mean that we lose hope. So, recovery is a bit like getting to the top of a mountain. I mean, recovery is really arbitrary anyway. What is that? Who knows? Like, it's different for everybody. The goals that people want to achieve, the direction they want their life to go in. But getting to the top of a mountain, you can't just walk up a mountain. You need a strategy, and you need to break it down. And if it's a really tough mountain, you definitely need to think about the resources that you need to take with you on that journey. And for the cyclists among you, you know you can't just ride up a steep hill like this. You've got to go dog-like. You've got to turn back on yourself, and you've got to kind of create a longer, more windy path to get up there safely. And that's sometimes what we have to do with mental health. You can't just go from A to B. There's lots of factors to consider. And sometimes we've got to go slow and break things down. And it can feel like progress isn't being made or made quick enough. But sometimes we've got to make it sure and steady before we can go for it. But sometimes we need to pause, catch our breath, stabilise before we can move forward. So it's really hard, isn't it? Because life moves so quickly. And with young people, there's always an exam that they need to be studying for, or an interview they need to be going for, or they need to be getting a job, they need to be doing this, they need to be doing that. And there isn't time to just pause and reflect and dedicate some space and some time to thinking about well-being, or their values, or what's important, or time with friends, and hobbies and interests. But that is the stuff that matters. So, another analogy is the tug of war. If we think of kind of the young person being in a tug of war with their thoughts, with their feelings, with the world around them, it's really exhausting. Yeah? And if you think of kind of, well, I've got a monster here, and that's a bit of a caricature of distress, of crisis, the kind of beast that we're fighting within. But if you are locked into this tug of war, and you're fighting, and you're holding on, you're gripping on for dear life, you can't see anything else around you. You certainly haven't got the energy, or the headspace, or the resources to focus on anything else other than the monster in front of you. And so everything else just falls away. Your friendships, your hobbies, schoolwork, things start slipping because you can't do it all, and you're so focused and you're so locked in this tug of war. And I guess for our young people, they're so afraid of what losing the tug of war means. So they can't let go of the rope. They've got to keep fighting. And the longer they keep fighting, the more hopeless they get, the more weary they get. So you've got a couple of options, haven't you? You can co-opt people in, come hold the rope behind me, pull harder. But the problem is with this monster, is it kind of thrives on that. It brings everybody else in, it pulls everybody else in. So maybe radically what we need to learn to do is just put the rope down. What does that look like? What does that even mean? What am I trying to say? Well, I guess what a lot of I see in clinic is people say, I don't want this thought, I don't want this feeling, just make it go away completely. But we can't do that. You can't get rid of thoughts and you can't get rid of feelings. And actually, the harder you try and the more you try and avoid them, the bigger they get. It's like the elephant in the room. You know, well, don't think of a pink elephant. Don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it. Oh, you're thinking about a pink elephant. But this is what our young people do. These thoughts and feelings are so overwhelming, they're so intolerable. They'll do anything to escape them, but their attempts to escape them make them worse, paradoxically. So if we're to put down the rope, what does that look like? Well, I guess it means just observing and noticing, oh, I'm having this thought. It's a horrible thought, I don't particularly want the thought, I don't particularly like the thought, but it is just a thought. And rather than fight it and avoid it, escape it, wish it wasn't there, do everything and anything possible to get rid of it, we just accept that it's there, accept that it's going to come, and accept that it will go. or accept that it will come and it will stay, and sometimes it will be really overwhelming and intolerable, and sometimes it might be more manageable. But by not actively fighting it and getting into a tug of war with it, you have the freedom and space to engage in other things. Yes, that might not always be easy to do, but it will be definitely easier than being in a constant fight with these thoughts and feelings. This is quite a hard concept. A lot of young people will just say to me, but I don't want that. I just want to get rid of the thoughts and feelings. I'm like, well, we can't. That's not how it works. But you do have a choice. We can throw everything at it, and we can all jump in and do this tug of war, and we can see how that gets us. Or we can learn that we have to live with some of these unpleasant thoughts and feelings. And there are things we can do, strategies, techniques, to moderate how intense we feel them or how frequently we feel them. But we can't get rid of them completely. Something to think about. Managing different perspectives. So, I guess, when a situation occurs, we've got a young person's perspective, a parental caregiving perspective, sibling perspective, professionals within the network. For those of you that know me quite well, apologies, I'm going to use yet another metaphor, an analogy that I like to use a lot. I often think of distress, crisis, mental health difficulty as a bit like an octopus. Now, if you imagine, the body of the octopus attaches itself to the young person. And that's where we see perhaps the most acute effects of the octopus. And that's where a lot of our focus is. But an octopus has got 8 tentacles. And so what it will do is it will wrap a tentacle around each person in that young person's network. So mum will have a tentacle wrapped around, brother or sister will, teacher will, GP will, CAMS will. And so everybody's kind of being organised by this octopus, maybe in slightly different ways to slightly different intensities. And we've got a slightly different relationship to the octopus. And sometimes some people will feel more detached from the octopus and better able to manage it than others. But this is really important just to hold in mind, because we will be coming at a problem, a situation, a challenge with an octopus tentacle wrapped around us, whilst trying to look at the octopus as a whole. So again, I'm asking you to reflect and think about your own position, as well as the position of the young person and the network around them. And how do you manage the different perspectives, the different pushes and pulls, the different priorities and the different expectations? Now, invariably, every complaint that comes through to CAMS that I cast my eye over or am involved in, it comes down to managing different perspectives and expectations. Because let me tell you, if a young person has been sent to see me and has been told, Emily's going to make you better, I'm going to fail every single time, because that isn't what I do. I don't make people better, I can't fix people. But if you're coming to me with that expectation, I'm never going to live up to it. So we're off at a bad footing right from the off. So when we're thinking about working with and supporting young people in crisis or having difficulties, we're really clear about what we're working with, what are the perspectives, what are the expectations, what can we reasonably do or not do. And often, I always say to young people, I'm really honest, I'm as honest as a brick. And sometimes the messages that I give are painful and hard to hear, but I'm always going to be honest. And if I can't do something, I'm going to tell you, I can't do that. And there are some things that are just not possible, but we can kind of sit with that together. So it's not about over-promising, and I know there's a real tendency to rescue and say, when somebody's in crisis, it's awful, you want to make it go away, it's nothing worse. You just want to fix it. But sometimes we can't, and we just have to be honest about that, and just say, this situation is pretty rubbish. It is. There's no getting away from that. So we can't over-promise and promise to make things better, or things will be okay, because they might not be okay. So, the other thing to hold in mind is, I guess a lot of us feel a sense of responsibility. You're here now, I'm guessing, because you want to make a difference, and you want to know, what can I do? And I bet you've come here with your expectations really high. They're going to tell me exactly what I've got to do when I've got a young person in crisis who's feeling suicidal. I'm going to come away from here with all the answers. You're not. You might come away over some ideas. But this is really important behind me. So oak trees are massive, and I know this because I've got a giant one at the bottom of my garden, and every autumn I'm knee-deep in acorns, and it really ticks me off because it's got a tree preservation order on it, and I can do nothing about it. And I look at this tree every single year, and I think, came from an acorn. Tiny little acorn. Into this giant tree that causes me grief every year. I love it really, but this is true. Tiny little steps can have a really profound, big impact. So you can't underestimate the basics and those tiny little steps, and we have to start tiny. Again, you can't rush in and do hyperloop therapy and all these strategies and techniques if the basics aren't in place. And young people will say to me, I can't do it, I can't do it. I'm like, you can't do it yet. You're still growing, you're still developing. Your brain's not fully formed yet. This stuff is complicated. I mean, I've just given you a really good example of, as an adult, how I've not been able to kind of regulate myself. This stuff is hard, it's not easy. So I guess what we need to do is, by breaking things down step by step, positive, nurturing, building experiences, that's scaffolding. Helping young people to grow and to develop, to tolerate emotion, tolerate that life is pretty packed sometimes, but that it is okay to reach out and have support, but that you don't have the answers either, necessarily, and sometimes it's about just sitting with that. Okay, more analogies. I'm on a roll today with these. I'm going to talk to you about jigsaw puzzles and snakes and ladders. Hands up, who's ever done a game of snakes and ladders or done a jigsaw puzzle? Okay, ace. I bet if I asked each and every one of you how you do a jigsaw puzzle, you'll all have different kind of approaches to this. Some of you will be edge pieces first, some of you will be like, I'm going to do the corner pieces first, some of you are going to focus on like splotches of colour and then kind of mush it together. You're going to have a strategy, right? And the same is true of how we deal with life. Yeah, so we might be aware of the vague picture of where we're trying to get to, and we'll have different routes to get there. And I guess we need to persevere. Because if you get one of those baked bean puzzles, they're really hard. And you need to persevere with that. Yeah? And sometimes what I say to young people that come to see me, and I can sit in a session and they just talk like this at me for like a whole hour, it's like verbal diarrhea, they're just telling me more and more and more stuff. Well, life is so bad. It's basically like they've handed me a jigsaw puzzle and gone, ooh, with all the pieces, and then given it to me to be like, quick, do the jigsaw puzzle. And I'm there feeling the pressure to make it look pretty really, really quickly. But I might not even be aware of what the actual picture is that I'm working towards, and they might not be either. And I guess this is the thing, as an adult, if I become unwell now, I roughly know what I'm trying to get back to. I kind of know my optimal functioning. I kind of know, like, my potential. But a child and a young person doesn't. So we can't compare themselves to their pre-illness state because they're never going to be that young again. They would have grown and developed anyways. So the picture is constantly evolving with young people, and that's why this is really tricky. We've been given baked bean puzzles all over the place, and we need to have a strategy. So let's move to Snakes and Ladders, another game that people have played. Some of you will have strategies when it comes to Snakes and Ladders as well, but really just want to highlight with this that there are lots of things that bring people down. And we can't always help sliding down a snake. Sometimes we just don't see it coming. Sometimes we do. And like that bit, for me, in a way, is worse. Like, I get parents, I get teachers saying to me, it's GCSE season coming up, A-level season coming up, it's interview season coming up, and I'm like, oh my god, okay, like, we know, this crisis point is going to hit. So I can predict a snake. But, oh god, there's so many unpredictable snakes out there too that are just ready to slide our young people back to the bottom of the puzzle. bottom of the board. So what we need to do is find the ladders to build them up. What's going to kind of help our young people keep on top? What's going to build them up personally? Their resilience, their resources, their support, the protective factors, the characteristics that are going to make it less likely for them to act on those impulsive and reactive thoughts and urges. So we've got to like scatter this board with ladders. We've got to cheat a bit and add them in. So I'm going to talk to you about some animals now. This is about caregiving responses. Now, each and every one of us in this room will be able to identify with these animals. Some of you will be able to identify more strongly with some animals than others. Now, I have taken this from some eating disorder literature by Professor Jeanette Treasure from the Maudsley Hospital in London. But I think this applies to every young person in the land, so we're going to use it anyways. Here we've got the kangaroo. The kangaroo symbolises an accommodating parenting style. Now, I really don't like seeing young people in distress, and my natural innate urge is to make it better, to problem solve, to fix it. It's a maternal, paternal instinct to protect, make better. And you think, what's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that. Well, yeah, there isn't. But if we always do that, we never give the young person an opportunity to problem solve for themselves or to tolerate and withstand difficult stuff. If we're always saving and rescuing, they don't learn to do that for themselves. So, I remember when I first qualified as a psychologist, a family came to me and they said, oh my God, we're having all sorts of problems with the school. And I was like, don't worry, I'll deal with this. I'll call the school, I'll get this sorted out. And it wasn't until a few years later down the road, and I was like, oh God, I've totally disempowered that family. I was trying to be helpful, and I thought I was being helpful, and I probably was short term, but I didn't actually skill up that family. I was being too much of a kangaroo. And too much of a people pleaser too. Here we have the rhino. Now this characterises the caregiving style of being driven by frustration. Like there is nothing worse, is there, when somebody doesn't listen to you or doesn't follow your instruction. Because often you're doing it with really good intent. And you know this is good for somebody, so why aren't you just doing it already? The problem is, the more stressed you get, the more forceful you get with your instruction, the more disengaged and shut down that young person's going to be. You're then going to feel disrespected, not listened to, so you're going to get more pissed off. And then you're more likely to argue. And there's going to be that frustration. And then there's total breakdown in communication. So what we want to be is we want to be more dolphin. So the story goes, I really hope this is true because it's kind of cute, that when the dolphin has a baby, it swims out front, it guides the way, it leads the way, it shows the baby dolphin exactly what to do, how to do it. And as the dolphin gets a bit bigger, they swim side by side. So the parent gives them a little bit more responsibility, a bit more autonomy, but it's there, doing stuff together, lovely. And as that baby gets bigger still, it then swims out front with the parent behind. So actually, the dolphin is on its own journey, own path, making its decisions, but knowing the parent is right there just to nudge it in line if it kind of falls off track. And isn't that exactly what we try and do with our kids? Yeah, when they're tiny, I've got an 18-month-old, I'm going to be pretty much doing everything for her. Although she swears by she can put her own shoes on, she can't. But we're now in that side-by-side stage. So I'm like, okay, you use the spoon for your porridge, and every now and again I'm like, woo, quick, let me just dive that into your mouth for you. So I'm doing that side-by-side for some things, but other things I'm out front. And as she gets older, I hope that she'll be able to do her own journey, knowing that I'm there to guide her and give her support and advice. So that's what I want to do. So now we've got some different reactions. Here we've got the ostrich, head in the sand. It's fairly obvious, I guess, that this is representing avoidance and minimization. Look, life is really busy. As adults, we're juggling all kinds of different competing demands. And it's really easy to just be like, oh, God, can this wait? Because I've got 25 million things to do right now. Like, I just don't have time for this. Or, you'll be fine. Like, everybody worries about their eyebrows. Like, it's so easy, isn't it, to kind of hear our kids, like, worrying about stuff or talking about stuff and just be like, later. But actually, if we're always doing that, we might miss stuff. And there's a really lovely saying, I think it goes something like, if we listen to the little stuff when they're little, they'll tell us the big stuff when they're bigger. Now, of course, like, you're busy, you can't drop everything to listen to every single little thing. But I guess it's about being in tune with our kids and picking up when perhaps they have got worries or they're struggling, and providing them the opportunity and space to reflect on what's going on for them, as opposed to kind of shutting stuff down or minimising. Here we've got the jellyfish. And I guess this kind of represents a style of caregiving or an adult response of being quite defensive or quite prickly. Now, if ever I'm working in a family and I sense a parent or a carer being quite prickly or quite defensive with me, like, this is a red flag that this parent has had it up to here, that they're completely done, that they're completely swamped and overwhelmed, they're feeling criticised, they're feeling like not heard, not listened to, not supported, and that they don't know which way to turn. Now, let me tell you, when you have a baby, every single person in the world wants to give you advice. Like, whether you ask for it or not, the unsolicited advice is insane. There's so much of it. And you end up just feeling like, shut up, shut up, shut up, I can't think straight. Now, if you add into the mix your child having a problem, let's pick something arbitrary, like they've stubbed their toe, people will still give you more and more and more advice. If you start to kind of ramp up the difficulty, your child's being bullied, your child is self-harming, your child has an eating difficulty, your child is experiencing suicidal thoughts and urges, people will be like, have you tried this? Have you tried that? I would do it like this. I wouldn't do that. And you end up feeling crap. You end up feeling like a complete failure as a parent, and that nothing you do is good enough or right. So you get defensive and you get prickly. Completely understandable. But when you get defensive and when you get prickly, you then shut down communication and you can't work collaboratively at all. And what young people need is for all adult caregivers to be on the same page, singing the same hymn, consistent. So when I see any kind of prickliness or defensiveness, for me, that means, okay, this parent's overwhelmed, and what I need to do is work really, really hard to come on side with them. And we're on the same side, we're on the same team, we want the same thing, we want this child to be functioning, happy, healthy, safe. So we are on the same team. So there's quite a bit of work to be done when you see jellyfish. So what we want to aim for is be more dog-like. Not just any dog. You don't want to be a terrier, they're so yappy. You want to be like a St. Bernard. St. Bernard, St. Bernard, I don't know, St. Bernard, I've never met one, but so I'm told they're really loyal, really loving, always happy to see you. And that's what we want to be kind of emulating. That unconditional kindness, compassion. And that's really hard. If you've got a child who's telling you to F off every other day, or not listening to you, not wanting to kind of engage with you, it's going to work pretty thin. But that's what we want to try to get to, that position. So I'm sure some of you will recognise yourself in these animals, I certainly do. And it's not saying that you're wrong or that you're doing it badly or you're not doing well enough. I guess it's just something to be mindful and aware of. So we're going to move to language. We've touched on today just how important language is, that words have power. And I guess I've written down here some really practical things about when young people are in crisis. Your ability to hear, your ability to think, your ability to communicate really shuts down when you're in crisis. So we want to kind of keep things simple. We really want to kind of keep people in the room with you. So do a lot of grounding by using someone's name. Connect with them, use their name. Make sure you get their name right as well, it's really important. Speaking slowly, calmly, use less words. Repeat key messages. Pause. It's okay to have silence. You don't have to fill every single void with, oh my gosh, I should be saying something useful here. It's okay to just sit. It's also okay to say, I don't know what to say. I say that. Keep questions to a minimum. When you're in crisis, the bit of your brain that does rational thinking isn't on, it's not working. So asking questions, not great. Asking how are you? God, I've done that. I mean, not a great question to be asking. You're likely to get, I feel like shit. You want to avoid using things like irony, sarcasm, figurative language, rhetorical questions. Just keep it simple. Being really aware of like your personal space when you're kind of communicating with that young person who's perhaps not in a great place. But ultimately, we're talking about young people, we're talking about children. Just think about how you would like to be spoken to if you were struggling. That's often a really good mark. I often get, oh gosh, I just don't know what to say. I'm like, well, what would you want somebody to say to you? What would you say to your best friend? Again, like, I think you can have your professional hat on, and yes, there are things you need to tick off and do and say, but also just be a person. Be with a person who is distressed. And, you know, the rule book kind of goes out the window a little bit. Just say what you need to say, be authentic, be honest, be true. Because young people will see through that. Let me tell you, they know when you are not being genuine. They know when you don't really care, or when you're clock watching, or when you're thinking, oh my god, I haven't got time for this. Or when you're kind of, your mind's on other things. Language is so powerful, and I just want to kind of acknowledge, for maybe the Twitter users in the room, you'll be really aware there was a really devastating suicide of a young person yesterday, and it was particularly devastating because her final tweet shared some words from her crisis team that were not particularly validating. And I think we just need to be really mindful and reflective of how we deliver messages and what we say, and be clear with our intent. I make mistakes all the time. It's a bit of a joke sometimes that I've got foot and mouth syndrome. Like I say things meaning one thing, and I can sometimes pick up, oh, my delivery isn't quite how I intended it. And it's okay to kind of apologise and, you know, acknowledge when perhaps you've missed the mark. And we really want to check out with people what they've heard from us as well. You know, sometimes I'll check and say, did you hear what I meant? Like, what do you think I meant when I said that? Can I just check you've heard me? Or can I just clarify what I meant? This language is so powerful. It really is. So, a couple of practical things that you can do, because I know everybody loves a little bit of practical strategy, and there are things you can do. There are things you can do in the moment that can help people come back to the here and now. So the power of 5, your hands are raised. For those of you that have got 5 fingers, particularly ace, because it's easier to remember. 5-finger breathing. Breathe in, up one finger, breathe out, down the other side of the finger. Breathe in for a finger, breathe down for a finger. And you can do that with 5 fingers. Do it for as many times as you need. Natalie said, body holds the key. Absolutely does. If we can try and stabilise and calm our body down, I'm not saying it's instantly going to magically make everything better, but it certainly can help our window of tolerance. So breathing is really powerful, slowing and steadying our breathing down. We've got the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, many of you will be familiar with. This is about grounding people, getting them back into the here and now. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing that you can taste. And just getting them to connect with the moment, their surroundings, as opposed to being perhaps too caught up in what has happened or what might happen, and then getting carried away with those thoughts and those feelings. The 5-second plant feet wall press is literally just going up, and there isn't a wall here for us to do it. I'm a bit scared to do it, but I won't lean heavily, but you lean against. So you're connecting your body with something tangible and really just being mindful of what it feels like, noticing the sensations of your hands, your feet, your muscles as you're leaning your body weight and you're pressing up against a wall. And the 5x5 rhythm ritual. So again, this is about kind of connecting your body with the here and now, the present moment, and changing that moment to re-feel a different physical sensation. So you can stamp each foot 5 times, you can jump up and down and do 5 star jumps, you can clap your hands together 5 times, butterfly hugs. And what that's doing, it's not instantly going to get rid of crisis, but what we're trying to do is ground people. Come back to me, come back, we're in the here and now. Let's focus on where we're at. Let's get your body back in the room. Let's get your thoughts and mind back here in the here and now. So the 5x5 rhythm ritual can be really helpful. It doesn't have to be those 5 things, it can be anything, but the more physical they are, the quicker it is to ground somebody and bring them back to the present moment. Right, I've been waving around. I'm finishing. Sensory considerations and de-escalation. Now, this isn't just for those who are neurodivergent. Anybody who's experiencing an episode of crisis when you're outside of your window of tolerance, your environment is really critical to helping you to kind of regulate yourself. And what's really interesting, I'll just share again on Twitter, I love a bit of Twitter by the way, is Paper Chase had done this hour where you could go in and it was low sensory. It was like an hour like on the first Sunday of the month or what have you. And there was a few people like, oh, that's brilliant, that's really good. And then a lot of people were like, well, why aren't you just doing that anyways? Because who likes all the big flashing lights and the loud garish music? Why can't you just accommodate everybody all of the time? If you can do it for 1 hour, you can do it for all of the hours. And it is so true. We really need to think about dialing down the sensory sensitivities of the environment when somebody's in crisis. So there are some suggestions up here. They're in your packs too. Not an exhaustive list, and some of these just won't be practical for your places of work, but they're definitely things to think about. If you've got somebody who's escalating or in crisis outside their window of tolerance, one of the easiest things you can do to try and contain the situation is to look at the environment. What can we do to try and make sure this environment is as calming and as containing as possible? And then protective factors. These are really crucial. You know, we've talked about actually these can reduce the likelihood that somebody's going to act on their kind of thoughts, urges, and impulses. And so what we want to do is be thinking about how do we build these in from a really early age and how do we cultivate them? I think what's really interesting, primary school kids are pretty good at this. They've got loads of hobbies, loads of interests. They're off to kind of swimming and brownies and cubs and karate and dance. Get to secondary school and it falls off a cliff. And all they do is sit in their bedrooms on their phones playing games. And yeah, there is a role for that, of course there is, but there is more to life. And by doing kind of hobbies and interests and leisure pursuits, we get mastery, we get skills, we meet people, we get communication skills, we get support networks. So this stuff is critical, and we need to model it as adults, because how many of us in this room really make time for ourselves to do those sorts of things? It's really hard, I know, to squeeze it in, I know in my own life, but it's critical to our well-being. And I just want to leave you now, again, your packs of jam, packed full of stuff. Our website, punchcams.nhs.uk, is pretty good. There's a help I'm in crisis button, you can smack that, comes up with a nice kind of decision-making tree. Do you need help right now? Talks through some resources. There's a downloadable coping plan, which is also in your pack. There's a lovely little video of me and a young person completing one of these that gives you some ideas of how you can do that. There's all sorts of stuff in there. Please do check it out, because actually the best way for you to help a young person is to know these resources inside out and back to front so that you can quickly trip them off your tongue, as opposed to going, oh, I've got a pack somewhere, let's see what's in it. If you've got the apps downloaded on your phone, you've had a little play with them, you know how they work, you're in a better position to be able to then kind of invite a young person to use them too. Helen is waiting right here, which means my time is up. Thank you.